Welcome to What You Don't Know You Don't Know, the podcast that dives headfirst into the surprising, the overlooked, and the misunderstood. Hosted by a curious duo and one man, one woman, we explore the world's most fascinating ideas hiding in plain sight. From science and religion to politics, psychology, history, and everything in between, we shine a light on the knowledge that's publicly available but rarely discussed. Each episode is a deep but never dull conversation that challenges assumptions, sparks new perspectives, and reveals just how much more there is to know, especially about the things you didn't even know you were missing. Whether you're a skeptic, a seeker, or just someone who loves good conversation, this show will leave you thinking, questioning, and most importantly, knowing.
Okay, let's unpack this. Picture this. You're absolutely convinced something from the past happened one way.
Yeah.
Maybe a famous movie line or, a company logo you've seen 1,000 times, even a big historical event.
Right.
And then you find out it didn't. What you distinctly remember just isn't the accepted reality. Did Darth Vader really say, "Luke, I am your father"? Or were the Berenstain Bears actually spelled A-I-A-A all along?
That uncanny feeling, that sort of disconnect.
Yeah.
Where your memory, maybe shared by lots of people, clashes with the record.
Yeah.
That's really the core of this phenomenon it's blown up online.
It's become known as the Mandela Effect, right?
Exactly.
And it's rooted in this idea that large groups of people have these distinct, shared, false memories about everything from pop culture to world events.
And for this deep dive, you, our listener, have given us a really fascinating set of sources. So we're going to explore this from multiple angles.
We'll look at the popular theories, the ones that propose reality itself has actually changed.
Yeah, and then we'll dig into what psychological science and even some recent empirical research tells us about how our memory actually works. Because it's maybe not what you think.
Our mission then is to guide you through all this material, pull out the key insights, and maybe help make sense of why so many people feel like the world subtly shifted, while they weren't looking.
Let's jump right in. Where did this whole thing start?
Okay, so the term Mandela Effect, it was coined by Fiona Broome, a paranormal researcher, around 2010.
Right.
The sources explain she noticed that she, and many others, shared this really vivid memory of Nelson Mandela dying in prison, like back in the 80s or 90s.
I remembered news reports, funerals.
Yeah, even speeches, apparently. But the thing is, Mandela was released in 1990. He actually passed away in 2013.
So that gap, that disconnect between this widely shared memory and the documented past, that's what she named the effect after.
Exactly.
And from there, the list of examples just exploded online, didn't it? People started seeing it everywhere.
Oh, yeah. One of the biggest ones, the sources really highlight this, is the spelling of the kids' books, the Berenstain Bears.
Right, the ein versus ein thing.
Yes. A huge number of people are convinced it was spelled B-E-R-E-N-S-T-E-I-N with an E.
But it's actually
B-E-R-E-N-S-T-A-I-N with an A.
It's wild how certain people feel about that.
It really is. The sources even mention, anecdotal stuff, a blog post from 2012. This person's family looked at their old books and, yep, N. But the whole family remembered N. There's even a comment mentioned supposedly from Mike Berenstain himself talking about a family name change way back, which, some ME folks jump on that.
While others would say, hang on, Occam's razor, maybe there's a simpler explanation than reality changing.
Right, exactly. Then you have movie quotes. That's another massive category.
Oh, yeah, the misremembered lines. The sources list a bunch.
Like Star Wars, everyone thinks it's Luke, I am your father.
But it's actually, no, I am your father.
Subtle but different. And Snow White.
Magic mirror on the wall. Not mirror. Mirror.
Forrest Gump. Life was like a box of chocolates.
Not is.
Jaws. You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Not where.
Field of Dreams. If you build it, he will come.
Not they.
Even Wizard of Oz. Tona, I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore.
No, I don't think we're in Kansas anymore. It's amazing how ingrained the wrong versions are.
It really is. And it's not just words, visuals too, right? Logos, characters.
Yeah, constantly. C-3PO is a big one. People remember him having a silver leg.
Which, okay, he actually does in some scenes, but many remember him being entirely gold. It's specific.
Right. And the Monopoly Man. The little guy from the board
The
game.
monocle. Everyone pictures him with a monocle.
But he doesn't have one. Never has, apparently.
And the Fruit of the Loom logo?
The cornucopia. That horn of plenty basket behind the fruit. So many people remember it.
But the company says
Never there.
Curious George, the monkey.
Remembered with a tail. But he's an ape. No tail.
Pikachu, the Pokemon.
People remember black tip on his tail. It's actually all yellow with a brown base.
Volkswagen logo. People remember a gap between the V and W.
But there isn't one in the official logo.
The sources mention lots of company logos, Kit Kat, Coca-Cola, but the companies usually say, nope, no changes.
It even stretches to, like, geography.
Yeah, how so?
Some people recall South America being, well, further east compared to North America, or Australia being much closer to Indonesia.
Weird. And anatomy, too.
Like the heart's position more central versus mostly on the left. Or even the shape of our floating ribs supposedly changing.
Okay, that's getting really fundamental. What about history?
Historical events, too. Tiananmen Square, the Tank Man photo.
Iconic.
Some remember him being run over, killed by the tanks.
What the record shows, he stopped them, then got pulled away.
Right. And the JFK assassination. The car.
People remember a four-seater.
Yeah. But the Zapruder film clearly shows a six-seater limo. 6 people inside.
Wow.
And maybe the most sensitive for some. Claims about the Bible changing. Specifically the King James Version.
Like which verses?
A really common one is Isaiah 11.6. Many remember it as, the lion and the lamb shall lie down together. Poetic, right?
Yeah, sounds familiar.
But the KJV actually reads, the wolf and the lamb shall dwell together.
Wolf, not lion.
Right. And proponents claim these changes aren't just typos online. They're in old physical Bibles, too.
That's a lot. And the sources stress that people experiencing this, they don't just think they remember. They feel it, right? Deep certainty.
Absolutely. Intense subjective certainty. And they often point to what they call residue.
Residue, like leftover bits?
Kind of. Snippets like maybe an old photo that seems to show the wrong logo or misquoted lyrics on old merchandise and newspaper clippings. Things they feel support their alternate memory.
Like breadcrumbs from the old reality.
That's the idea for them. And it's the sheer volume, the fact that so many unrelated people share these very specific, sometimes obscure discrepancies. That's what convinces many proponents that it's not just memory playing tricks. Something external must be happening.
So, if they think the past itself has been altered, what do the popular theories say is doing the altering? What's responsible?
Well, the core belief among many of these self-described Mandela Effect researchers, as the sources call them, is that, yeah, reality itself, or the timeline, has been physically changed.
Changed by what? Some kind of force?
Technology?
Technology is the big one.
Yeah.
And the sources point to a couple of main culprits that come up again and again, top of the list, CERN.
The Large Hadron Collider in Switzerland.
Exactly. The belief is that it's experiments, smashing particles together to understand the universe. That they've either accidentally or maybe even intentionally
Then what?
punched holes in space-time, contacted alternate dimensions, directly messed with the timeline.
That's quite a claim from particle physics research.
Yeah.
Why CERN specifically?
Well, the sources suggest it's partly just the scale and nature of it. They talk about dimensions, fundamental reality. That sort of resonates with these ideas of reality manipulation.
And people latch onto things. Yeah. Proponents point to little details, like things in a CERN promotional video, "We are happy at CERN," certain signs, numbers. They interpret these as subtle hints or codes about shifting reality.
Okay. And it's not just CERN, is it? Quantum computers get mentioned too?
Yes, D-wave quantum computers, that's another frequent target. The idea is their incredibly complex calculations could somehow be tampering with the fabric of reality itself.
How so?
Well, the sources quote D-wave's own descriptions, like talking about tapping into a vast fabric of reality. And proponents note their first big customer was Lockheed Martin, the defense contractor.
Ah. So that connects to a bigger picture for them.
Exactly. For people already thinking in terms of conspiracy, that link to military or corporate power fits a narrative of some hidden group using this advanced tech to manipulate things.
So what is that broader conspiratorial narrative the sources describe? It sounds like it goes beyond just explaining the Mandela effect.
Oh, definitely. As the source material analyzes it, the narrative often involves a hidden hand, a shadowy group. Sometimes it's scientists, politicians, corporations, globalists, financiers, the usual suspects in these kinds of worldviews.
And what are they supposedly doing?
Working towards a new world order or maybe a prison planet. Total control. And technologies like CERN and D-Wave are seen as the tools they're using to achieve this, maybe by manipulating humanity, maybe by controlling reality itself.
This whole idea of hidden groups, reality shifts. things operating outside the mainstream. It leads us to a concept the sources introduce called the cultic milieu.
Yeah, that's from sociologist Colin Campbell. He used the term to describe this sort of cultural underground, a space where different marginalized belief systems hang out and interact.
Like what kind of beliefs?
Things like the occult, alternative spirituality, conspiracy theories, basically ideas that are rejected by or exist outside of mainstream science, mainstream academia, official religion.
And the sources are saying the Mandela Effect kind of happens in this cultic milieu. It brings different groups together there.
Exactly. The material shows how many beliefs become this weird convergence point. Groups that might seem very different find common ground because they all distrust or oppose the official version of reality.
What kinds of groups?
Well, you've got one camp described as more secular, maybe New Age or occult leaning. They draw on things like esotericism, quantum mysticism, maybe Eastern philosophy.
And they see CERN and quantum computers as
enabling these reality shifts, opening doors to parallel dimensions, messing with timelines. Some even reinterpret things like the failed 2012 apocalypse prophecy as proof we did shift timelines and now we're in some kind of spiritual battle.
Okay, that's one side. What's the other main group mentioned?
The other major camp comes from a fundamentalist Christian perspective.
Yeah.
And they see the Mandela Effect through a completely different lens.
Biblical prophecy.
Exactly. They interpret the reality changes, especially the claim changes to Bible verses, as fulfilling prophecies, like Daniel's 7.25 about an entity trying to change times and laws. They see it as signs of the end times, satanic rituals, the Antichrist.
So CERN and the globalists are
Seen as part of a satanic occult conspiracy. The sources note this perspective often aligns with being anti-science, anti-intellectual. Though, interestingly, there's division even within this group.
How so?
Some accept the Bible changes as proof the end is near. Others fiercely deny the Bible can be changed, arguing it's divinely protected. So they reject that specific ME claim, even while accepting others.
Wow, so you have like New Age quantum mystics and fundamentalist Christians, both pointing to the Mandela Effect in this cultic milieu, united by the idea that reality is being messed with and a deep distrust of the official story.
Precisely. The sources talk about conspirituality, this blend of conspiracy thinking and alternative spirituality, and the Mandela Effect fits right in. It's a phenomenon where these diverse, often marginalized belief systems cross paths and kind of feed off each other.
And the internet is like the super highway for all this mixing and matching.
Oh, absolutely crucial. The sources really emphasize platforms like YouTube, Reddit, blogs. Technology makes it so easy for these rejected knowledge claims, as scholars call them, to spread like wildfire.
Bypassing traditional gatekeepers.
Totally. They mix, mutate, and reach huge audiences way beyond small, isolated groups like they might have in the past.
It's that idea of the merging of fringe and mainstream that Michael Bakun talks about.
Exactly. Fringe ideas suddenly pop up in mainstream conversations. The sources even mention Hillary Clinton's 2016 speech referencing dark conspiracy theories from the dark reaches of the internet as an example of this crossover.
And sometimes figures from the tech or science world almost seem to feed into it, even unintentionally.
Yeah, the sources mention things like the D-Wave founder, Geordie Rose, making comments referencing H.P. Lovecraft and summoning AI, or that fake human sacrifice video that was staged at CERN near the Shiva statue.
Right, I remember that. CERN had to respond, didn't they?
They did, clarifying it was staged by visitors, not related to their work. But whether it's serious comments or pranks, these things get picked up by ME proponents online and woven into the narrative as proof of sinister occult happenings in high places.
It really shows how these belief systems are built from all sorts of threads, online speculation mixing with interpretations of real-world events or comments.
Okay, so we've talked about the phenomenal, the popular theories involving reality shifts and hidden hands, and the cultural space where these ideas thrive. But the source material takes a really important turn now.
Towards psychology, what's going on inside our heads.
Exactly. Let's shift gears from CERN and conspiracies to the science of memory itself. Because the fundamental understanding from cognitive science, which the sources highlight, is key. Human memory is not a perfect recording device.
Right. Not like a video camera or a computer file.
Not at all. Memory is constructive. This is a huge concept going back to researchers like Bartlett and later people like Daniel Schachter really detailed it. Our brains don't just passively store experiences.
They build them.
They actively build memories. Using fragments of information, bits of what actually happened, mixed with our existing knowledge, our expectations, maybe even stuff we learned later. When you remember something, you're reconstructing it.
And that reconstruction isn't always perfect.
Far from it sometimes. Schachter calls memory a time machine of the brain, or a virtual reality simulator, precisely because it's this active, sometimes flawed reconstruction.
So that really strong feeling of certainty people report with the Mandela Effect. The science says that feeling doesn't actually guarantee accuracy.
Exactly. There's a concept called autonoetic consciousness from Endel Tolding. It's our ability to mentally travel back in time, to re-experience a past event with this subjective feeling of awareness, like you're living it again.
That feeling of personal recollection, episodic memory.
Right. And that's what so many ME proponents rely on. I know I saw it this way. But the science is clear. That strong, subjective feeling can happen even when the memory itself is inaccurate. Certainty doesn't equal correctness.
The sources also mention something called memory of the future. How does that fit in?
Yeah, that's an idea from D.H. Ingvar. It suggests our plans, our concepts about what will happen, actually shape our consciousness right now in the present, and maybe even how we interpret the past.
So, like, our view of the future could subtly color our memories.
The sources kind of loosely connect it, suggesting this dynamic interplay between past, present, and future in our minds. Maybe the feeling of a changed past isn't isolated. It potentially links to how we perceive now and what we anticipate. It just underscores how fluid our mental timeline can be.
What about terms like confabulation? Is that what's happening here?
Confabulation is definitely a relevant psychological concept. Marcus Herstein writes about it. It's when people unconsciously create false or distorted memories or stories to fill in gaps, often holding on to them with real conviction, even if there's evidence against them.
Sounds a bit like the Mandela Effect description.
It does share features, yeah. But the sources make an important point. We shouldn't just leap to dismiss the phenomenon of the Mandela Effect as mere confabulation, especially in a clinical sense like brain damage. It's more complex.
Why not?
Because the ME involves large groups sharing very specific false memories. The sources suggest we need to understand the implications of that shared subjective experience, how these collective beliefs form and spread, rather than just labeling individuals.
Okay, so memory is constructive, fallible, certainty isn't proof, but the ME involves shared, very specific errors. Which brings us to that empirical study the sources cover, right? The Visual Mandela Effect, VME.
Yes. This study by Deepak Prasad and Lauren Bainbridge is really interesting because it takes some of those specific visual examples we talk about, the logos, the characters, and actually tests them in a controlled lab setting.
Moving beyond just anecdotes.
Exactly. And they define VME specifically. Shared, specific false memories for visual icons.
What was their main finding?
The big takeaway, a really solid nugget from the sources, is this. For certain well-known visual icons, people often get it wrong when asked to pick the real version. Low accuracy, but there's incredibly high consistency in the specific mistake they make. Lots of different people consistently remember the same wrong feature.
And this was confirmed for icons like the Monopoly Man?
Yes, the Monopoly Man remembering the non-existent monocle, C-3PO, the Silver Lake Confusion, Fruit of the Loom, the Phantom Cornucopia, Curious George, the imaginary tail, Pikachu, the black tail tip, and the Volkswagen logo, the non-existent gap.
The study found consistent shared false memories for those specific things.
For those 7 icons, yes. The effect was real and measurable for them.
Okay, so they showed the phenomenon exists. Did they try to figure out why? What causes this shared error?
They ran several experiments to test different explanations. First, they looked at schema theory.
The idea that we just fill in the blanks based on general knowledge, like rich old guys often have monocles, so we assume the Monopoly Man does.
Sort of. And while schemas do play a role in many memory errors, the study found it didn't fully explain why everyone was making the exact same mistake for these specific VME items. The consistency was too high.
Okay, so not just schemas. What about attention? Did people just not look closely enough at the logo in the first place?
Good question. Experiment 2 tackled that using eye tracking simulation. They measured where people looked when viewing the icons.
Did people who got it wrong just glance over the key spot?
Nope. That was the fascinating part. There was no significant difference in how long people looked at the crucial areas, like where the monocle would be, or the Fruit of the Loom basket, whether they later remembered it correctly or incorrectly.
Wow. So they looked right at it.
They looked right at the spot, but still formed the wrong memory. Even more, when asked later, the incorrect responders often reported remembering seeing the false feature, even though the eye tracking showed they hadn't fixated on it, or it simply wasn't there in the image they saw in the study.
So it's not just bad perception. The brain is actively creating a false memory of seeing something specific.
Seems like it. Then they tested another common idea. Maybe people have just seen the wrong versions floating around online or somewhere. Source confusion.
Right, maybe they saw fan art of Pikachu with a black tail tip.
Experiment 3 looked into that. They scraped Google Images for the VME icons.
What did they find? Are the wrong versions common?
Very rarely, actually. The incorrect VME versions, Monopoly Man with the monocle, etc., barely showed up in typical image searches. And when they did appear, it was almost always on websites specifically about the Mandela Effect itself.
Ah, so the false memory probably isn't caused by seeing the wrong version out in the wild all the time.
Doesn't look like it based on their findings.
Okay, that rules out a major explanation. What about the drawing experiment?
Yeah, experiment 4 was really revealing about memory being constructive. They had people draw the icons, sometimes from long-term memory, sometimes just after seeing the correct icon briefly, testing short-term memory.
And people drew the errors.
Frequently. They spontaneously drew the VME mistake, the monocle, the tail, the cornucopia, even for icons they weren't super familiar with, and sometimes even seconds after having seen the correct version.
So it's not just struggling to recognize the right one. People are actively generating the specific error when they try to recall or reproduce the image.
Exactly. It suggests the VME is deeply tied to the process of memory recall and reconstruction itself. The brain seems to be inserting these specific, consistent errors, maybe based on schemas or other internal factors, during the act of remembering.
That study really lands hard, doesn't it? It gives concrete, empirical weight to the idea that these shared false visual memories are a genuine phenomenon and points strongly towards the complexities of memory construction itself, rather than, say, reality literally changing or people just not paying attention.
Yes. And when we sort of pull all these different threads together now, the experience itself, the popular theories, the cultural context, the psychology, the empirical VME data.
Right. We see the Mandela Effect isn't just some weird internet quirk. It feels like a window into something much bigger, doesn't it? About how our minds work and maybe about our whole information environment now.
Exactly. It's a powerful illustration first of how memory actually functions. Dynamic, reconstructive, not a perfect recording, and prone to errors that can be surprisingly consistent across people.
And second,
it highlights the incredible impact of the internet and digital culture, how it shapes collective beliefs, how it blurs lines between verifiable facts and strongly felt, widely shared convictions, especially in those online spaces, that cultic milieu that thrive on challenging official narratives.
the sources mentioned Kevin Kelly's idea, the internet as an omega library, a hive mind.
Yeah, where all information is hyperlinked.
Okay.
And Kelly even speculated that finding information online might become so seamless you could start to feel like creating it.
Which sounds eerily similar to the Mandela Effect narrative, doesn't it? This idea of a reality that's shifting, or maybe a post-truth world where objective fact feels less solid.
It really resonates. The ease with which these diverse, sometimes rejected ideas can mix and spread online creates this environment where challenging the mainstream is simple and figuring out what's true becomes this intense struggle, both personally and collectively.
It almost makes you wonder, could the Mandela Effect, or at least the visual Mandela Effect that Prasad and Bainbridge documented, could it be an early symptom?
A symptom of what?
Of how our individual memories and maybe our shared sense of reality are being subtly reshaped, maybe even destabilized, by the sheer volume and fluidity of digital information, by technology mediating so much of our experience.
That's a heavy thought. So we've taken this deep dive into the Mandela Effect. We started with that strange feeling of shared false memories, movie quotes, logos, history.
Then we looked at the popular theories laid out in the sources: CERN, quantum computers, reality shifts.
We explored the cultural underground, the cultic milieu, where these ideas mix and spread, bringing together really diverse worldviews.
Then shifted to the psychological angle: memory as construction, not recording.
And finally, we landed on that empirical evidence for the visual Mandela Effect, showing specific shared visual errors are measurable.
And pulling it all together, the material suggests this isn't likely down to one single thing, right? Not just memory mistakes, probably not literal timeline changes.
Seems much more likely to be a complex mix. Psychological factors inherent in how memory works, combined with the unique pressures and dynamics of our modern, technology-saturated information culture.
Which leaves us, and you, the listener, with a final thought, maybe something to chew on.
In this world overflowing with information, where digital memory can feel so fluid and collective beliefs catch fire online, how do you actually define what's true? How do you verify your own past, trust your own memories?
And maybe bigger picture, what does it mean for our shared reality when collective memory itself can be shown to be consistently, measurably wrong about even simple things?
And that's a wrap on this episode of What You Don't Know, You Don't Know. If your brain feels a little fuller or like it just stumbled onto something way more interesting than expected, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and tap the bell so you don't miss next week's deep dive into, well, something you didn't even know you didn't know.